Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're going to be talking about Noah's Ark,
Okay.
but not the part you're probably thinking of.
Right. Not the animals going in. Yep.
Exactly. We're going past the flood.
Looking at the aftermath.
Yes. The
Yeah, it is
aftermath,
beautiful.
Genesis chapter 8.
From the King James Bible.
Of course, the King James Version. And we'll be using Matthew Henry's commentary
Oh, nice.
to give us a little bit more
A
insight.
little more depth.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about what happened after the rain stopped?
Yeah, what was that like?
Like, what were Noah's first steps when he got off the ark?
Right, when the water started going down.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So let's find out.
It's a really interesting part of the story
Yeah.
that I think a lot of people skip over.
They just want the animals.
Yeah, they want the drama of the flood. But what happens next is super important.
Right.
Genesis 8 takes us from this total devastation to, like, starting over. And I think there are some big lessons in there.
About faith and hope and second chances.
Exactly.
One thing that really stood out to me in the text
Okay.
was this idea of God remembering Noah. It doesn't feel like a casual, oh yeah, I remember that guy.
It's more meaningful than that.
It feels like a return to mercy
Right.
after a period of judgment.
Absolutely. That's a really important point.
What do you think about that?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's like this big turning point
Okay.
in the whole story.
Yeah.
You know, we go from God being angry to God showing grace.
Yeah.
And the way that's shown is really interesting.
How so?
The flood was this huge, powerful force, right?
Right.
And now the waters are gently going down.
Receding.
Yeah, receding. And it's
Uh.
important to note, God sends a wind to dry up the earth.
Oh.
So it's not like God's just waiting around.
He's involved.
He's actively making things better.
I like that.
It shows that he's invested in this renewal.
So the waters are drying up, mountains are reappearing.
Yeah, land is coming back.
But how did Noah know when it was safe?
To leave the ark.
Yeah, I'd be a little hesitant to open that door
Right. After all that time.
after all that time.
That's where it gets really interesting. He doesn't just run outside.
What does he do?
He sends out a raven first,
A raven?
and then a dove.
Interesting choice.
Those birds were really symbolic even back then.
Why those two birds?
I mean, what do you think they represent?
I don't know. I'm curious to hear your take on it.
Well, the raven was known for scavenging,
Okay.
picking at whatever it could find.
Right.
It flies off and it doesn't come back.
It's not a good sign.
It's kind of bleak, right?
Yeah, false start.
Yeah, like maybe things aren't okay yet.
Lots of uncertainty.
Exactly.
And the dove.
Doves are associated with peace.
Purity.
Yeah, all those good things.
So what happens with the dove?
Well, the first time it comes back empty-handed.
Oh, no.
But the second time, it brings back an olive leaf,
the olive branch.
the iconic olive branch.
Right? A symbol of peace, new beginnings.
Yeah, but think about what that little leaf meant for Noah.
I mean, it must have been incredible.
Right, after months of water everywhere,
Yeah.
to see proof that plants were growing again.
Life was coming back.
Life was returning.
Powerful moment.
It's not just any leaf either.
Oh, what do you mean?
It's an olive leaf.
Okay.
Olive trees were super valuable back then.
For their fruit and oil.
Right, they were a source of food, of light.
Sustenance.
Exactly.
So it's not just a sign of life.
It's a sign that things can be good again.
Abundance.
Yes, abundance.
Okay, so dove comes back, olive branch and beak, everyone piles out, right?
Not quite.
Oh,
There's still this sense of order.
okay.
It's not until the first day of the first month of the 601st year
Wow.
that God tells Noah to leave the ark.
Really? So he had to wait.
It was a directed action.
Interesting.
He didn't just decide on his own.
It was God's plan.
Exactly.
So Noah's waiting patiently.
Trusting that God will let him know when it's time.
And when that time finally comes,
What does Noah do first?
he builds an altar.
Right, he could have built a shelter, looked for food,
Explored.
but his priority is honoring God.
It's a pretty powerful statement.
It really is.
It shows how deep his faith was.
It's an act of gratitude, of acknowledging what God has done.
And what does God do in return?
He makes a promise
One of the most famous promises in the Bible.
to never again curse the earth with a flood.
The rainbow.
The rainbow appears as a sign of that covenant,
Wow.
a promise of seasons of stability
A future for life on earth.
after everything they'd been through.
Yeah,
That rainbow must have been a huge comfort,
I bet.
a symbol of hope, of God's faithfulness.
But before we go any further,
Yes,
I think it's time we hear what Matthew Henry had to say about all this.
because he always brings a unique perspective.
Let's see what insights he has to offer.
So, Matthew Henry, he was this theologian and biblical commentator.
Okay.
Lived in the 17th and 18th centuries.
A while ago.
Yeah, but people still read his stuff today.
Why is that?
He was really good at making these ancient texts relevant.
Bringing them to life.
Exactly. Like you could connect them to everyday life.
I like that.
So when he looks at this story...
About Noah sending out the birds.
Yeah, the raven and the dove.
He sees something deeper.
It's more than just checking if the ground's dry.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
He thinks the raven and the dove,
Okay.
they actually represent two different spiritual states.
Whoa. Okay, break that down for me.
So the raven, it's happy scavenging, right?
Yeah, it's just picking at whatever it can find.
Content with the chaos.
But not really satisfied.
Right, it's like a soul that's stuck on the material world.
So the raven represents spiritual complacency.
Yeah, just going through the motions.
Not really seeking anything deeper.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you have the dove.
The dove.
Henry sees the dove as a symbol of the soul that's searching.
Searching for what?
For something more, for real peace, you know?
True.
Yeah, it's the soul that finds safety in God.
Finds its way back to God.
Right, and that connects with the dove returning to the ark.
Finding refuge.
Exactly, it's like a parallel to our own spiritual journeys.
We're all looking for that sense of belonging.
That peace, that feeling of being home.
I like that.
Henry even uses this phrase, "Return thou to my rest, O my soul."
Where's that from?
Psalm 116.7, it's beautiful.
It is.
It's about finding solace in faith.
And that ties in perfectly with the themes of Genesis 8, right? God's mercy and renewal.
It all comes together.
It's amazing how Henry finds all these spiritual meanings.
In these little details.
Yeah, the raven and the dove.
He does that a lot in his commentary.
But even if we just stick to the text itself.
There's so much symbolism in this story.
Yeah, we've talked about the dove and the olive branch.
But what about the flood itself?
Okay, the flood, yeah.
It's a pretty dramatic way to start over.
A cosmic reset button.
But it's powerful imagery.
Cleansing, washing away the old.
It's like a baptism for the whole world.
A chance to do things differently.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's the rainbow.
The rainbow.
God's promise.
Never again.
It's a reminder of his mercy, his faithfulness.
And the hope for something better.
And it's incredible how these symbols still resonate today.
I know, right?
Like, think about the dove and olive branch.
They're everywhere.
In art, in literature, peace movements.
They represent something universal.
Hope, renewal, the relationship between us and the divine.
It's timeless. It goes beyond any one culture.
It shows that these themes are important to all of us.
That's the power of these stories.
Speaking of which, what happens next?
What do you mean?
Noah's in this new world. What does he do?
How does he rebuild?
What are his priorities?
Well, we talked about him honoring God.
Building the altar.
Giving thanks for being saved.
Right, his first priority.
But Matthew Henry points out something else.
Oh, what's that?
He says that God didn't tell Noah how the flood would end.
Okay.
Or exactly when he could leave the ark.
So Noah had to trust.
He had to rely on his faith.
And the signs God gave him.
The dove, the olive leaf.
It was a test.
A test of faith, a lesson in patience.
Because knowing the timeline wouldn't have changed anything.
Right, it would have just satisfied his curiosity.
But he had to walk by faith, not by sight.
And I think that's a big message for us today.
How so?
We live in a world where we want answers now.
Instant gratification.
We want to know what's going to happen.
And we want to control it.
But sometimes the most important things take time.
Patience, perseverance.
Trusting the process, even when we can't see the end.
It's hard.
It is, but Noah's story shows us it's possible.
It's a good reminder that even Noah had to deal with uncertainty.
He had to trust in something bigger than himself.
But before we wrap up,
Yeah.
there's something that's always bothered me about this story.
What's up?
The whole God wiping out humanity thing.
It's a tough one.
It feels a little harsh.
Yeah, I can see that.
How do we reconcile that with a merciful God?
It's a valid question.
And one that I think a lot of people struggle with,
We have to remember, this is an ancient text
written in a different time.
with a different context.
So how do we approach those parts of the story?
The parts that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah, that challenge our modern sensibilities.
I think it's less about choosing a side
Okay.
and more about recognizing the complexity.
Of the text.
We can acknowledge the difficult parts.
While still appreciating the deeper messages.
The hope, the renewal, the power of faith.
I like that it's not about shying away from the tough questions.
It's about engaging with the text.
Thoughtfully. respectfully.
Understanding where it came from.
And letting it spark conversation.
And deeper reflection.
So within that conversation,
we can explore all the layers.
the symbolism, the theology, the debates.
And how these ancient stories still shape us today.
How they help us understand ourselves and the world.
Exactly.
So as we get ready to, leave this deep dive,
come back to the present.
What are some key takeaways?
What should we remember about Noah after the flood?
That's a great question.
It's a story with a lot to think about. A lot to think about.
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is hope.
Hope.
Yeah, this whole story of Noah after the flood, it's about second chances.
Like hitting the reset button.
Exactly. Even after all that devastation.
There's still a chance to start over.
And make things new again.
I like that.
And it's not just about the physical rebuilding.
Right. It's deeper than that.
It's about spiritual renewal.
Oh.
Remember what Noah does first.
Builds an altar.
He worships God, gives thanks.
Shows his gratitude.
For being saved, for being given another chance.
And that's something we can all learn from.
Especially when times are tough.
Yeah, it's easy to forget to be grateful.
But connecting to something bigger than ourselves.
It can really help.
And speaking of connecting, we talked about the symbolism.
Right, the dove, the olive branch, the flood, the rainbow.
They all have so much meaning.
And they're not just literary devices.
They represent something we all experience.
Human emotions, hopes, fears.
Resilience. The search for meaning.
It's timeless. It goes beyond any one culture.
Exactly. Think about how often you see those symbols.
I see them everywhere.
It shows how powerful they are.
And I really liked Matthew Henry's take on the birds.
The raven and the dove.
He said they represent two different spiritual states.
It adds a whole other layer to the story.
So the raven is complacency. The dove is seeking something more.
Which path do you think you're on?
That's a good question, one I need to think about.
And remember what else Henry said?
About patience and trust.
Yeah, even when we don't know what's going to happen.
Noah had to wait, have faith that God would guide him.
And he was rewarded for that faith.
We could all use a little more of that these days.
Patience, trust, faith.
It's so hard in today's world.
Where everything is instant.
We want answers now.
But sometimes the most important things take time.
So we need to learn to trust the process.
Even when we can't see the end result.
It's a valuable lesson.
One that Noah's story teaches us so well.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
head back to our own time.
What's the one question you'd leave our listeners with?
Imagine you're Noah.
Stepping out into that new world.
Full of potential, but also uncertainty.
What would be your first priority?
How would you rebuild? What kind of world would you create?
That's a great question.
It makes you think about hope, second chances, the power of choice.
We may not have a global flood to deal with.
But we all have the chance to create something new.
Something better in our lives and in the world.
And that's a journey worth taking.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. See you next time.